Welcome, everybody, to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's guest is the host of the Rod Pedersen Show, Regina's finest. Yes, it is Rod Pedersen. Rod, thanks so much for being on today's episode. This is great. I'm so excited to have you on.
My pleasure. Happy New Year. Great to be here, Matias.
So, Rod, you guys have had lots of great stuff going on with your show out of Saskatchewan and have been covering so many different sports and have been having a lot of success in the last year. How did you anticipate that the idea being proposed of a show based around yourself would have brought you guys this far in this amount of time?
I'm still not quite sure how it happened. And it's funny that you would ask that because we just had a meeting on that today. And literally we're 300 and close to 400 episodes in, Matias. And I never thought it would fail. I didn't think it would fail. Like there was no way that we were going to stop doing the show, but there was a lot of people laughing at us a year ago when we started this, year and a half ago now, I guess. And it was just a Facebook Live platform. But when we went to national television on July 2nd, that's really when people sat up and took notice to what we were doing. It also made a big difference when we were lining up guests. But no, I didn't envision it happening. But I will say this, less than a week of being on air, players, particularly CFL players, were on it. That this is different. This is different than other shows. This can be a show for the player's voice. And that really carried us a lot to where we are now. So, we didn't plan too much of it. And I had offers to go work in mainstream media that just didn't really appeal to me. I'd done it for 30 years and this was exciting and it was new. So I didn't plan it. I just wanted to show up and talk. I think you know that feeling. That's what's happened. And it's been awesome.
And you guys have had lots of recurring guests and different media figures and players of Tori Gurley and also having, for another former voice of the Riders every Friday as well. You guys have had, the Frenzy Fridays. You guys have had tons of fun with the different guests you've brought on. You've had Grapes, you've had on Ron McLean multiple times. So what's been the most fun elements for yourself? Because obviously you've built a name for yourself, having worked in the industry for 30 years, but you've also been able to work with players and other media figures through the show so far in small snippets.
Well, when it started, it was mostly just my friends coming on. If you saw anybody in the first 6 months of our show, those were my friends. And then, a certain few things happened. I'll call them God shots, if you will. Like you mentioned, Tori Gurley, very big name in pro football. And I actually considered after leaving the Riders, completely getting out of the business and going and working in recovery, mental health and substance abuse field, because frankly, that's a lot more rewarding. But Tori called me from South Carolina for some career tips, and I didn't even know that he would know who I was. And all of a sudden we formed a really close association. I didn't know who he was. All of a sudden he's on every Friday doing NFL tips, and then Sportsnet scouted him and he's done Sportsnet now, it was, I guess as things went along and I said that the players noticed that this is a different show, all of a sudden there was a thing going around with players. They would say, you haven't made it until you've been on the Rod Pedersen show. Frankly, I think it started as a joke. I really believe that, but then it became a thing. And then players were like filling up our DMs, the language, saying, I needed to get on. And the teams couldn't stop it. I mean, I think legally they can't stop the players from doing interviews if they want to. And I mean, you come from a generation where the players want to get their followers up. They want to get, for endorsement deals and stuff. And they saw this as a great way to do it. So that happened. And then I don't know. I mean, I've met Ron McLean a few times before, but I'm pretty sure he never remembered me. Don Cherry was an interview I've wanted to do since high school. And I think that was a God shot that he said yes. I've been trying to get him for 30 years. He never said yes. So we finally got him on our show. So there's a lot of, I'd like to say karma stuff and universe stuff coming into our favor here. That's what I think it is just being a good person. But you're in Winnipeg, right? Like one thing that I really, me and Bomber fans did not get along. So, and the Bombers. So it took a while to melt that wall. I thought it would take like 6 months. It took about a year. But now we got good friends in Winnipeg. Our viewership in Winnipeg is high. Calgary, I don't think we're ever going to mend that fence, and that's fine. But it's just, I think the passionate sports fans, and don't forget, I'm not just football. I did hockey for 17 years in the Western Hockey League. I think the fans knew that I was incredibly passionate about my teams and sport. And I think when they realized that I was out now sort of neutral on the team of every team, a lot of doors opened up.
And there's a lot of strong fan followings that exist within Western Canada, far more I find than in Southern Ontario or in the Maritimes, because like, I'm going to be very honest, when you look at the standard for sports media in Western Canada, what I've done over the last year when forming my podcast and, who are good guests or who are interesting people to talk to, I started to take notice of your show through an Instagram page that I'm a part of that is based on Bombers fan following. And there was different clips that we used from your show talking about the Bombers in the Grey Cup and then what ended up happening with them winning. And then I started to take notice and say, I was like, who is this guy? Like, what is this show? And I started to look at all the guests and all the players, and it almost seemed like the benchmark for what fans were consuming in Western Canada. You see, obviously, with how popular you guys are in Regina and how popular you guys have become in Winnipeg. Calgary is, Calgary is Calgary, right? But you guys have had such a great array of guests from football and hockey and also a few other sports, and how fast it's built is fascinating. And especially you mentioned, like, in today's day and age, this generation wanting to boost their social media following and put themselves out there, and PR people from CFL teams not really being able to stop much of it if it's something they really want.
Yeah.
And it's really, I think, helped people like myself and others who didn't really get that. And I speak for so many people when I say they didn't really get that fix of watching the CFL this year. The simulation you guys did was really fun. Lots of people shared the posts about the Riders throwing the ball off the crossbar and all the different things that you guys had going on with the Grey Cup. So it's really been helpful for those people that don't have the specific flagship TSN fix that you get in Ontario or let's listen to the Fan 590. This is something different and new, and it continues to evolve every day. So it's definitely been one of the most enjoyable things that I think fans of sports have consumed in Western Canada in the last year, for sure.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I had coffee with former CFLer last week, and he said, keep doing what you're doing. And I said, we don't know what we're doing. That's the problem. Like, every day, I think if you're watching it, Matthias, there has not been a plan. And that CFLer said, just follow your gut. He said, when the sim ended and the CFL Grey Cup ended and it became winter, instead of just, beating the dead horse that was the CFL, you pivoted and brought on NFL guys, right? And that was the decision that I consciously made. I said to our producer, Clark, I said, just open up the NFL Rolodex. And all of a sudden it was, Gus Farad and Brad Sham, the voice of the Dallas Cowboys, and Garrick Jones, Houston Texans alumni president. Like, those were guys that I'd never met before. So yeah, it was the ability to pivot. But you brought up a really good point. And, TSN has been great to me. They've aired clips of our show. They've given us credit for stories that we've broken. But when I go on Toronto radio to talk about the CFL, it's always like, we're going to get to the Blue Jays and Raptors next. But first, here to talk about the CFL, it's Rod Pedersen. And I'm like, man, I'm getting the sense that people across this country are just tired of the Blue Jays and Raptors. Like, I love me some Blue Jays. Believe me, I do. But I love me some CFL too. And for whatever reason, early on, people thought you guys were trying to copy TSN and Sportsnet. I said, no, we're the anti-TSN and Sportsnet. And that's not that we're adversaries, but just imagine a sports show that for everybody outside of Toronto. if that kind of gives you an idea, and what we do. But I'll also say this about the Bombers. I didn't know Mike O'Shea real well, but I knew Paul LaPolice really well, and Richie Hall even better. So when I severed that tie with the Rough Riders and I was kind of out there on my own, those guys were my boys. So they knew that what I was all about, and I got a lot of good friends on the Bombers. So that was an easy friendship to make there. So I like the fact that, the Winnipeg Ice are a Western Hockey League team. You guys have all the same teams in your market that we have in ours. Why can't we talk about these leagues, just as fans? Why do we got to be enemies? So, hey, the rivalry stuff's fun. Shoot, I had Jordan Eberle on my show, and he called me a traitor for wearing a Moose Jaw Warriors shirt. And I was like, Abs, like, I'm trying to get along with everybody. Like, so it's a constant push and pull there, but it's fun to try and tackle every day.
And especially with how desperately fans need that lifeblood of the rivalry the Bombers and the Riders have. That's really what keeps the CFL ticking. I'm sure that you've been to many games in Toronto. I'm sure you went to many games at the Sky Dome, and you went to games at the when it became Rogers Center, and then when they went to BMO Field. And we notice a trend as fans of Prairie teams. When you go there, you happen to see some NFL fans who get lost thinking that they crossed the border to Buffalo and they just so happen to show up with their NFL paraphernalia at the Argos game. Or you see more fans of the away team, like you're watching, the Arizona Coyotes, and you see tons of Riders fans bring a bunch of paraphernalia, even though it has nothing to do with the NHL. So how much people care about football here in Winnipeg and how much people care about football in Saskatchewan really keeps the CFL going. You can't really forcefully inject care into markets like BC or Toronto. Ottawa's done great. I'm very surprised at how well they've done. Hamilton's done great, as always. But those major markets where they're trying to hit, even Montreal. Remember, you had Ben Cahoon in your show, I guess almost just about a year ago now, and he was talking about him doing what he's doing down in Utah and having coached, and you're talking about his recognizability in the Prairies more than in Montreal, where he had one of the greatest receivers career in Alouettes history, but people in Montreal kind of tune it out over time because they're so fixated on hockey. And that's obviously the reality of living in Canada. But what you guys have done for the CFL is so important, because if you would have taken an alternative path, who knows what talk and buzz there would have been about CFL stuff in the last while, right? How much of the CFL's content you've seen on social media, how much has it been guys that have made a significant play in the NFL? Deontay Spencer, punt return touchdown, or Brandon Zylstra this week recovering one for a score against Washington. The CFL needs that attention to keep boosting, and I think you guys carry a lot of the load, and I'm sure that you've been having so much fun doing it.
Well, that part's been fun. I'm not sure the CFL agrees that we're the best thing for them, or not the best thing, but you know what I mean, an asset for them. I'm not sure, because we've literally, Matthias, never talked about it. We haven't, other than the sim, where, to be honest with you, it was week 15 that the CFL called us and said, look, we need to sit down and talk and get something on paper here as far as an agreement, which we did. And it went pretty well. And they were very happy with the Grey Cup, which was a lot of fun, but we haven't talked about anything coming forward into 2021. But just when you talk about the Riders and the Bombers, I think we can have fun with it. Gary Lawless, who you would know well, still tweets about the Bombers and tweets bad stuff about the Riders. And I laugh. I think we have to understand this is supposed to be fun stuff here, and if Gary's going to remain the Bomber guy and I remain the Rider guy, can we do that and not have our cars vandalized if we drive to the opposition stadium? You know what I mean? That's somebody always takes it too far.
Of course.
But the one thing I really admired about Winnipeg was when we went in there for Labor Day Classics, your fans were never pretended to be anything they aren't. They would be wearing their Bomber gear, and they would see us on the street and go, we don't like you. You're not welcome here. We're going to kick your ass and send you back over that border home. I respected that. Whereas you go into Calgary to play a game at McMahon, and they're shaking your hand and smiling, and you're your buddy, and then they'd probably kick your butt and then stab you in the back on your way out. Winnipeg, they let you know how they felt about you right from the start. And so to have been able to overcome that, I think, is actually kind of a cute story. But obviously you're a big CFL fan. I could honestly sit and talk about this all day, and I won't. But in the 2017 East Final, I will never forget, the Riders were visiting the Argos. It was at BMO Field. Mike Babcock was there. Mitch Marner was there. It was a pretty big thing. They orchestrated a flyby. I remember riding in on the bus to BMO Field, and there was acres and acres and acres of tailgating going on in Toronto, downtown Toronto. And our guys were all up against the window. I'll never forget, Dron Carter was one of them. And they were like, look at this. This is like the NFL. They couldn't believe that was going on in Toronto. And in the end, it was a crowd of 27,000. It's not bad by CFL standards. Most of them were Rider fans. But Matthias, it's just in those major markets, it can be saved but it needs to be done delicately, cleverly, creatively. And I'm not 100% sure they're on the road to doing that. But how would we know as we sit here today? Because, everything's so secretive in the CFL.
And especially you mentioned the points about that rivalry between the Bombers and Riders with going to games. I went to the West Final this year and also the Labor Day Classic in Regina with one of my very good friends who convinced me it would be a fun time to go. We went, and as much as we knew that we were, outsiders and stuck out like sore thumbs, the Riders fans, albeit from all the stereotypes and things you hear from the outside, were super classy. They were great folk. They were really enjoyed us being there. And even after the game was over, they weren't rubbing it in or stabbing us in the back. And that was the thing I really appreciated the most. And then when the opposite happened, when the Bombers won and Mosaic Stadium evacuated in 30 seconds, for what was left of the Rider fans that hadn't already bolted to the door, they were saying, hey, good luck in the Grey Cup, and they were being very classy. So that first two experiences I had watching games to Saskatchewan were super enjoyable, although both games were decided in the last play, and one went the Bombers' way, one went the Riders' way. But for our favor, the one that mattered the most went our way. But that's a part of the fun of the rivalry, and that's part of the back and forth. And as far as you mentioned the 2017 Eastern Final, Cody Fajardo scoring the game-winning touchdown, I'm sure a play that you'll hope that he'd make for the Riders against the Argos sometime in the future. But that is what is needed for the CFL. You need to see that excitement in Toronto like they had with the John Candy Argos in 91 with Bruce McDowell and Wayne Gretzky. And it shouldn't have to take the great one saying, I give my blessing unto the Toronto Argonauts to be a part of my investment portfolio, and then people start bolting to the stands again, because the Argos are historically the best team in the CFL. We can't ignore that, and they have an important part of creating buzz around this league. And you mentioned having Tori Gurley on the show and him having been a Toronto Argonaut. So to transition a little bit here, him giving you a call, you were talking about wanting to go into recovery coaching because you were a big advocate on that. And with having worked many years on the radio for the Riders, things kind of came to a bit of a transition when there was an opportunity for you to have worked with the Flames, and then things ended up not working out, and then you came to the Rod Pedersen show. So for us to go back a bit, what was the first point that really made you a big advocate on recovery coaching and mental health? Because it's clearly such an important part of the fabric of today's professional sports world, as we've seen many athletes start to speak out about it. But back in the day when you first started working, I'm sure that there was not even so much as a murmur about mental health.
Well, no. And I applaud you for doing your homework on that interview or on this interview. But yeah, you're right. All I've ever wanted, Matthias, was to be the voice of an NHL team on the radio. That's all I wanted. So when I got that deal in the summer of 2014 with the Flames, and then a week later it was pulled by the Flames because somebody told them that I was an alcoholic and that I would be a horrible hire for them. It took me literally like 6 months later, I was in recovery. 6 months after that contract was pulled by the Flames, I'd hit my rock bottom, and away I went. I faced an intervention and never drank again. And it's coming up on 6 years here, January 27th. But I've done everything in my life backwards. And let me just say this, when I speak to kids in a school, especially elementary school kids, imagine their faces when I say, imagine thinking about something every single day for 35 years, from the age of 6 until I was 41. All I wanted was to be the voice of a team. I got it, and then it was yanked away. And the kids just, right? Like your number one dream. Like, that's painful. So anyways, it took me years to get over the fact that whoever my detractors were right, And then I got into recovery, and then I was like 2 years into recovery, and I had an offer from a company in Montreal called Hired Sobriety. You can look them up, to become a sober coach. And I just said, what is that? I said, sounds cool, but I've never heard of that before. And they told me you coach people to get sober. You travel with them. You're their coach. You imagine a personal trainer training you in the gym, working with you every day.
Yeah.
I train people in recovery, and it started out as sobriety. And then very soon my inbox was just jammed with people that had nothing to do with substances, but everything to do with anxiety and depression and any variety of mental health issues, which, by the way, I had a diagnosis after I got sober. I was like 5 months sober, and I'm like, I'm still screwed up. I got to get in and get a psych evaluation, which I did. And I came out of there with anxiety disorder, depression, OCD, ADD, and addiction. So I call them the Fab Five. And the reason they're classified as severe mental illnesses is that not one of them is ever going away. They'll never, ever go away. So I manage those to this day, and I'm not medicated. But anyways, just fast forward to being hired by Hired Sobriety. I'm like, I have no idea how to do this. And they said, no, you do know. We know of you, but go get some paperwork. Go get an online diploma, certificate, whatever you quickest, fastest thing that says you know what you're doing, and then come start working for us. So that's what I did, but they came to me. So I never planned to do it. Then when I say I do things backwards, that's why. So I've told people I never wanted to be an alcoholic. Who would? And once I was, I never wanted to get sober. And then once I did, I never planned to be a recovery coach, and did. So as far as that NHL thing, I don't know. I mean, I had to make a choice between football and hockey way back in 2010. I had to make a choice between the two, and I chose football to stay with the Rough Riders. I mean, I could have stuck with hockey. So that was a choice that I made on my own. And it gave me 20 great years in the CFL, a couple of Grey Cup rings, a lot of new friends had I never got into the CFL. So everything happens for a reason. But now with the guys that I'm coaching, whether they be moving up to the NFL, NHL, broadcasters that are on the national stage, if I have a hand in getting them to that level, I feel like I achieved that level. And so do they. So unless you've coached, which incidentally, I never wanted to coach at all in anything. So I became one. And then once you start to see the rewards of helping somebody along the way, that's why I told you at the start of this, there's nothing better than that. And that's the truth.
And one thing that I've read about in a few books is people talk about what is the meaning of life? And obviously that's a ginormous question. And people always say, well, happiness, just be happy, just be happy. But and you laugh, and when you've been in that scenario where you are at rock bottom, or you've hit rock bottom, and it feels like there's nothing, no matter what, you could be at a Riders game, you could be out to dinner with your wife, or whatever. There's nothing that will just flip the switch and now it's all good. There needs to be something greater. And some of the things that people talk about are purpose and having meaning and having something that is beyond yourself to look forward to. So you talk about coaching and helping others. There is such a great reward in helping someone that has struggled, or that is struggling, or that is in need of guidance, because the feeling that you will get of seeing them succeed and overcome their fears, their anxieties, their depression, their alcoholism, their substance abuse, there's no monetary value you can ever put on that. And that's why it's the most amazing job in the world. And from a previous interview I had on my show was Tom Higgins, who I know is on your show as well. And he talked about, one of the things he talked about to me was that coaching is the toughest job in the world, but it's also the most rewarding, because in professional sports, you can be fired tomorrow because they don't like your hair, or you don't have hair anymore like him. But when you succeed, it's such an amazing but humbling feeling, because you know that there was more. It's more than just about you. And that's one of the greatest things about all the coaches that find success. And it's even outside of sports, like in your scenario. So when you started coaching, when were there some moments that hit you and said, wow, this is bigger than me, or that really woke you up to the experience that you had and how important it was to speak up?
Well, I wasn't doing it very long before I immediately wanted to call every coach I'd ever dealt with, whether it be Corey Chamberlain, Ken Miller, Curtis Hunt with the Pats, Dale Durkach. I'm like, I get it now. I get it. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? I didn't realize what you guys were trying to do with the kids. So what I realized was you're only as good as your players. You know what I mean? And I've had to cut some guys because in terms of trying to coach them in substance issues and they're not doing what I tell them to do. And I'm like, I'm sorry, guys, I got to let you go. Yeah, it's like a personal trainer. I'm telling you to work out 30 minutes a day and eat healthy, and you're not working out at all, and you're eating a pizza a day. You're making me look bad. You know what I mean? So I've had to cut some guys, but eventually they come back because they get in front of me for a reason. But you see what I'm saying? I mean, you're offering guidance and they're not taking it. It can be very frustrating. And then once I got into it, I'm going into my 4th year of doing it. The guy that hired me, I was like whining to him going, they're not listening. Some of these guys aren't listening. And when are they going to wake up? And he's like, you haven't been doing it long enough. They are going to come back to you in the years ahead and say, I should have listened. Right. He's like, you're just so new at it. So there's that. And then, I'm glad to hear Tom Hagen say that. And by the way, I'd love to know how you know so much about this, Matthias, because you're 100% right. But as far as it being difficult, I got people coming to me and they're putting their life in my hands. That's heavy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like one wrong step right, one wrong step left, and they could die. Like that gets my heart rate going and adrenaline flowing. And somewhere along the line, I knew that this wasn't going to work with me doing play-by-play for the Rough Riders and doing recovery coaching at the same time. It's not going to work because we were doing a game in Hamilton. I'll never forget. Brandon Bridge started. TSN played it as a classics this summer. And the Riders came out for their opening drive. I'm like, here come the Riders. Brandon Bridge, 1st and 10 from their 35. And my phone goes off. And it's the dad of a kid that I'd done an intervention on telling me that his kid had just left the house with his drug dealer. What do I do? And I'm like, Bridge drops back to pass, goes deep. You know what I mean? Like my mind was in 2 different places. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wanted to be helping this guy. Whereas, this thing is fun, but it's not this, So I guess my point is I ask for guidance in these really tough situations. And so far, touch wood, it's worked well. But it's just when Tom says it's tough coaching, it is tough coaching because it's like, we got a lot of people depending on this kid, whether if it's an athlete or maybe it's an actor, that there's millions at the box office resting on whether this guy can stay sober or not. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of pressure there. And they're looking at me as the guy that's going to keep him sober or between the lines. So you see how that could be very exhilarating, but also a lot of, that's not pressure. I don't feel it as pressure, but it's just, there's some days we just go, oh, give me some guidance here myself.
It's such a tough scenario to be in because you mentioned all the coaches that you'd been involved with over your career and that have been in tough situations. And someone like Corey Chamberlain, right? He's been on good teams. He's been on not so good teams. And fans always talk about, is it the coach's fault if they lose? But if they win, it's not the coach's fault. It was the players. It's all about the players. But when they lose, the coach is the first person, right? Or the 13th man, people, Cave Street. But he did the right thing by taking responsibility rather than saying, actually, no, this guy went on the field and he shouldn't have. And, go blame him, go throw manure on his lawn, right? Like he took responsibility. And that's, again, one of the toughest things about being a coach. I'm sure with you following the NFL and being a big football fan, we see what happened last night for the first time in Foxborough in 2 decades. The Patriots get swept by the Bills. That hasn't happened since 99, and now people say, oh, well, Bill Belichick and is he not, or is it, now we're starting to see maybe Bill Belichick wasn't actually the one that was good and Tom Brady was carrying him. Right. But then there's other people saying, no, if you just switch Brady with Cam Newton, they'd still go 10-5 and make the playoffs. But it's a lot more complex than that. And I'm sure that you've started to see the clip that is turning into a meme of Belichick on the phone with someone upstairs and throwing the phone. He wasn't the person that was saying, I'm running the ship, I'm going to throw the flag. He probably had someone say, hey, Bill, it looks like it was sketchy, throw the flag. And he did it. He was trusting someone else. So I'm sure as a coach, there's moments where you have to trust that who you're working with is going to do what they said they were going to do or what you gave them to do. So what are some of the ways in which you cope with the uncertainty of being a coach? Because obviously there's a lot of weight on the livelihood of people put in your hands, as you mentioned before.
There's a couple of just simple ones. I mean, I learned really early when I got into recovery that you need to just float, just be ready to roll with the punches. Like when I got my intervention training in New York, the guy giving the training said, just be prepared. There's a semi coming at you from your blind side at all times, and it's going to hit you at some point. So just have your head on a swivel. Does that make sense? I mean, just that's one. And then two, don't have expectations of people. I'm very rarely disappointed in people because I don't have expectations in people. I know that sounds bad, but that's a big one. Just don't have expectations. And the other one is when I'm coaching with people, I start with like 100 trust points. And every time they lie or withhold something from me, it goes down, 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 down. There's been guys I've been working with that were into the negative of points on trust points. Whereas when I got into recovery, my counselor didn't trust anything that I was saying. And it really upset me because I'm like, I'm not lying to you when I told you I've never done drugs. Alcohol was my problem. He's like, well, everybody that sits on that chair has lied to me. I said, I'm not. So, you know what I mean? And I was insulted that he would think that I was. So it's just different concepts of how you do it. I'm not sure there's really one way to do it properly, but all you can do simply, I've found the road out. I'm very grateful to have found the road out. I'm trying to show other people the road out. If they don't take the road, I can't be responsible for that, I guess, to answer your question.
And over a course of many years, the culmination was at the moment where the Flames gig had evaporated from your hands. But what may happen, or what often does happen, is that it's a gradual buildup, right? Like, people talk about the issues of anxiety and depression or substance abuse, and it's not just an overnight occurrence. And that's one of the toughest things about finding the source of when did this happen. But it's not necessarily some one moment or one flash in the pan that made it all go downhill. It's always gradual. And I think one of the things that really helps people is to talk about how you're doing and to take your temperature mentally, because it's so easy to just go through the motions or to live day to day without thinking about what it is you're doing or how you're feeling. But then there comes a point where you ask yourself, when am I at my threshold? But by the time you're asking yourself that point, you've already gone too far. And so over the years of your work and your trouble with alcohol, did you ever realize that there was maybe a point where it would become an issue, or did it seem like all a blur until you'd reach the pain threshold at the moment with the Flames and then realized, okay, now I got to do something?
No, it's a good question, but it was none of that. My dad was a recovering alcoholic. He quit drinking when I was 2. So all through my childhood, he told me, be careful, you could be predisposed to this. But what the threshold or whatever, like as a kid, I wanted to take my own life because I was afraid of everything. During the day, I had no confidence. In elementary school, I wanted to kill myself. I'm not joking. And when I went to sleep, I was having nightmares. When I got into my teens, they turned into sleepwalking and I was falling downstairs and leaving the house. Like, my mind was torturing me constantly, 24/7. And when I discovered alcohol, I think I was 15 or grade 10, I couldn't get enough of it because it could just shut my mind off. You know what I mean? It just shut it off. And that began a 25-year love affair with alcohol. I mean, this is the greatest thing in the world. I don't have any fears. I'm tougher. I can talk to girls. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a mental health issue that was covered up by alcohol. So for 25 years, I didn't realize that until I got sober and the two were separated. And it was in my 30s when I left the Pats hockey team. Like, all through my 20s, I didn't have a real big issue. I was married, raising a young family. It was great. But in my 30s, I left the Pats and I had a lot of extra time. And that's when I started to get in trouble because my weekends were free. Imagine being the voice of the Rough Riders in this town. I never had a bar tab anywhere I went. You know, everybody wanted to drink with you and tell your stories. Like, I fell in a trap. It's my own fault. I wasn't strong enough to say no or get out of it. And when I realized it was time to quit because I was getting in a lot of trouble, I just gave up on myself. I couldn't quit. I could maybe go 2-3 days at the most without drinking. And that's the definition of addiction. Like, you want to stop a substance or a behavior and you can't physically. That's addiction. I didn't even know that at the time. I was so screwed up. And then so 6 months after that Flames thing was pulled, I faced an intervention because I was drinking every single day. My radio talk show was sponsored by Budweiser, Coors Light, and Great Western all at the same time. I had an unlimited amount of alcohol in my hands, which wasn't their fault, but I just couldn't say no. everything all hit at once. And that's when I hit the rock bottom, that I went into work, blackout. I was on an antidepressant and drinking all afternoon and don't remember going on the air. And that's when I was removed from the air and told, if you don't, faced an intervention and said, if you don't get help, you will be terminated. And that's where I give myself a very small amount of credit for making the right decision and just saying, I can't live like this anymore. It's too draining. I wanted to die. And that's why those addicts that you see under a bridge or out in the cold, you think, why can't they turn their life around? Well, I've been there in those positions. I totally get where they're at. And I don't know why they don't want to stop fighting. Because they say addiction's the only war that you win by surrendering. And that's what I did. So, and then that's when I realized the alcohol was just covering up all this other stuff. I'm sorry that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's the truth of it. It was mental health issues going back to the earliest I can remember is when I was 6. So that's how I can deal. You mentioned the prevalence of addiction and substances and mental health in sports. The reason I'm having success with that is I can walk into a room with a player, close the door, just the two of us, and say, "What's going on, man?" And it's like turning a key in them. And they just somehow know that I know that I've been there. And they're so used to, Matthias, having players screaming in their coaches, screaming in their face, "What's wrong with you?" Because I had 1,000 people yelling that at me. And the problem was I didn't know. These players don't know. They know there's something wrong. They don't know what's wrong. And I, in most cases, feel like I do, and we're going to help them get back on track. So that's a pretty good feeling.
And listen, like, as long-winded as you need to be and as truthful as you need to be is all that I could ever ask of, because that is why what we talk about in terms of mental health and Bell Let's Talk, and this, this should be something that is not exclusive to January. Obviously, Bell has the themed month centered around to start the new year off right. But I remember the first time mental health was never something that I talked about with my family or my brothers or my friends. And we didn't really know what it meant if someone was depressed or had anxiety and I'd never spoken or knew any people who had problems with substance abuse. And I remember the first time that Bell started the Let's Talk, I think it was somewhere between 2014 and 16. And it was in January. I remember watching this special that they had with Michael Landsberg. And I always remember him from Off the Record, and he was just sitting there, but the camera angle was weird, almost as if you were kind of in his house with him or something. And he was talking about mental health, and Howie Mandel was also featured on this. And they were talking about their struggles with anxiety and depression. And Howie Mandel talked about his struggle with, OCD and like real OCD. People, I think, throw around the term like a colloquial now, that it's just, it's when I need to be neat and organized. But I remember playing football in junior with the Rifles with a guy who actually was diagnosed clinically with it. And he was a very happy fellow, but we never really got to see, because football was kind of a bit of his, his escape, that time away from, those crushing moments of anxiety. And you mentioned having this mental health problem go all the way back to the time that you were a toddler. Alcoholism isn't just, oh, I love the taste of alcohol and I'm just going to keep drinking it and blah, blah, blah. Like it's really great that you brought up the point that it masks a mental health issue, because it does provide that outlet for people who are wanting to wipe their brain in a temporarily, so to speak, or not have to worry about thinking of certain things. Because from studies that have been done by psychologists and in some of the books I've read recently this year, they talk about people are so scared of being alone with their thoughts. They would rather receive like slight electrocutions or listen to music than just sit by themselves with no electronics, no entertainment, no books, nothing for 10 minutes. That's it. 10 minutes. You don't even have to be in a claustrophobic room. You can just be sitting out in an open field. And that indication right there, that study that people have conducted, just goes to show that mental health is something that everybody struggles with, and a lot more commonly than people think. When people go to see a therapist or a recovery coach, it's not, oh, you're cast away. You go to the island of misfits. That's something that is honestly a lot more common, or should be a lot more common nowadays. And especially you bringing up the point of once, you were let know by your father that you could be predisposed to this. So how you handle that as a little kid is just like, that's crazy. But if you're not, then it still may affect you. It doesn't really change that outcome. So that's one of the hardest things about breaking the cycle, so to say. There's people talk about the issues that exist in our culture, in our society here in Canada, that Indigenous people in northern parts of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or in the territories that struggle with these issues. It's not just something that I'm just not going to drink alcohol. The intergenerational trauma and the intergenerational problems that exist within families that have mental health issues, it's so hard to break. And that's why when pro athletes speak up, I was recording an episode the other day, and we were talking about DeMar DeRozan. And I know maybe you're not a super big NBA guy, so to say, but the importance of him talking about struggling with mental health and Kevin Love bringing it up was so crucial, because now other athletes in the NBA could speak up about it. And and I'm sure that you would agree on this, is that you could have been the play-by-play guy for the Dallas Cowboys, and you could have been making $10 million. You could be Tony Romo, but that amount of money is still not going to absolve you of any mental health issues you have. So I remember when people were saying, well, how could DeRozan be depressed, man? He makes 15 mil a year, 20 mil, and blah, 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 blah. But it's way more than just the superficial materialistic items that you can accumulate from your status. And when you're so focused on that destination, or you're so focused on trying to run away from your thoughts, that's when it gets you. So the question I was going to ask, I know that that's a little bit long-winded in return, is that with some of the pro athletes that you've seen now speak out, what are some of the things that you've been glad to see in how the conversation has moved forward? And what are some of the things that you hope to see moving forward, maybe from the side of guys that play CFL or play football?
Well, it's, the problems are only going to increase where we're at. Like, I don't see a decrease in people hurting or people struggling. I don't. I wish people would, we hear the term stigma a lot. We haven't brought it up in this conversation, but that whole business of, I'm going to go see a therapist or a counselor, and people say, what are you, nuts? No, I'm struggling. Most people, not most people, but a lot of people realize that they're struggling, but they're too afraid to say it because of the perception. So I like to hear any and all players and personalities come out and admit that they're struggling, but I'm not worried about them. We can probably help them. But when Dak Prescott says that he went into a state of depression last spring when his brother killed himself, and an idiot like Skip Bayless goes on the air and says, how can he say that? He's the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. He needs to be strong. Like, if I could have reached through the screen and choked Skip, I would have. Like, you are encouraging everybody to not talk. Skip, way to go. So I wish the public would come around a little bit on how much courage it took for Dak Prescott to admit that. It took a lot. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see every team have a mental health coach on staff. And by the way, I'm not offering my services. I'm not looking for a job that way. But in the NHL bubbles this year, I've talked to several NHL players that were in the bubble. And I said, did your team bring in a mental health coach? And they said, no, the NHL made a guy available, but nobody really went and talked to him. And well, the Tampa Bay Lightning brought in one only for their team. And Matthias, do you remember who won the Stanley Cup?
I'm not sure. I think it was the Tampa Bay Lightning.
It's not a coincidence.
No.
Okay. Like, I was talking with a Jets broadcaster a couple of years ago, and he told me how Mark Scheifele has a shooting coach and a mental coach and a nutrition coach, plus a coach in Paul Maurice. And I said to the guy, that's a lot of voices in his head. Like, does Paul Maurice not have a problem with all these individual coaching? And he said, Scheifele had a career year. Like, this stuff works. So I just wish people wouldn't be so shameful of reaching out for help. And by the way, I'm not sitting back pointing a finger at people, because I wouldn't reach for help. I was too stupid. I had to face an intervention before I went and got help. So I get the mentality, but I'm trying to get it out there that it is okay to say that you're struggling, and you do not need to tell the world. DM me on Twitter. Start with Twitter. Start with me. And I deal with a lot of people in Manitoba just because I'm visible that way. No, it's not going to go any further than me. and I'll direct you to the right people. And with Bell Let's Talk, yeah, it's wonderful because up until Bell Let's Talk, there was nothing. But Matthias, that's one day out of the year. Like, what about the other 364? That's the problem that I have. Or that whole, we didn't hear much about it this year, but over the past few years, sober October. People are like, I'm going to go sober for the month of October. And I'm like, good for you. Like, a lot of us are going sober today for the rest of our lives because we have to. It's not a gimmick. It's not a fad, sober October. Because if some guys don't stay sober, you fall off the wagon. Oh, well, I'll start again tomorrow. I know guys that could die, will very likely end up in another city and not know how they got there. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is serious stuff. And so, no, I don't hold anything against Bell for doing what they do. I applaud them for it. Nobody else is. But I know it's more than a one-day effort. That's all.
And especially with how important it is to have coaches and support. You're an avid golfer, as would be many people that love football and hockey. You think that guys like Tiger Woods and DJ and all of them, you think that they did it all themselves and they became magicians just because they had some God-given ability? No, they have a coach. And I first became exposed to this when I played football and I went to the University of Calgary in 2016, and Wayne Harris brought in a man by the name of Don Sweet, and I'd never heard of him before. And he coached kickers, and he said that he played for Montreal back in the 70s and early 80s. And then over the course of the year, he would always say these little phrases and these things that maybe didn't make that much sense at the time, but in the years that I've stayed in touch with him since, it's 4 going on 5 years almost, all the things he's said about how to be better at kicking or how these things apply to life, it starts to hit you and really feel ingrained. And he talks about, when you talk about golfers, they need a coach. They need somebody to at least be there, that third party. And that's just for their performance. That's not about mental health or dietitian. I'm sure that you've seen many of the social media tweets or many of the posts made about Russell Wilson. I spend about $1 million a year taking care of my body and personal chef, training, mental health, or Calais Campbell talking about that too. So it's not a coincidence that someone like Russell Wilson is, in the MVP race every single year. It's not a coincidence that Calais Campbell can play defensive end in the NFL, for over 10 years and still be very, very good. It's not a coincidence that Mark Scheifele had a career year, that Tampa Bay in the bubble, these guys haven't seen their wife and their kids, and they've been in a hotel for how long? And they're the team that came out on top. Whereas the year before, they collapsed against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and probably one of the most crazy upsets in NHL history in the playoffs. And so there's such an importance to reaching out. Like, you would reach out for help if you were struggling in sports performance wise. Why would you not do the same when you're struggling, like psychologically, right? So that the way that these points tie in together is important for people to realize that it isn't just, it's good that what Bell's doing is great, but you shouldn't just dedicate 1 month of the year to mental health. Or the same way that many of my friends who come from Southern Asia talk about their parents become frustrated at the idea of Mother's and Father's Day. Cause it's like, you should be respecting your mother and father every single day. Why are you just waiting for an arbitrarily chosen day by Hallmark to go and buy your mom flowers and your dad a new shaving kit or a lawnmower, right? So the remembrance that while sober October, it's good for people to put an importance on sobriety, having that mentality of being sober every day for the rest of your life and finding ways to find support and not worry about being ashamed of if you struggle or if you fail, because people will relapse. Nobody's perfect. And I'm sure in what you've realized in your work that people have to keep going and they have to keep reaching out. It's not, I saw a therapist once, it's all good, and they send me off on my way. So with these initiatives and the public stigma, what are some of the ways that you think, or what would be some of the real concrete, immediate ways that the stigma could be actually broken down?
I don't think it ever will, other than to sit here and talk about it on shows like yours. And I appreciate the opportunity, but there's people very close to me and also people that don't even know me that still judge me by my behavior when I was drinking. And it was almost 6 years ago. I can't change that. Like, if you can't see the change in me or don't want to see the change in me, That's out of my control. So having the opportunity to speak certainly helps. There's one thing that I wanted to bring up. If anybody cares that's watching, there's a book by the name of Mind Gym. Have you heard about it?
Mind Gym? I'm not sure if I've heard about it.
Okay, well, Mind Gym. It's written by Gary Mack, and he's a mental health professional, mental coach, and has been doing it for like 25, 30 years. And the concept of that is simply you would go to the gym to train your body. Imagine if there was a gym for your mind, that you could go literally work out your mind every day and make it stronger. And that's what the book's about. And that's what I did. Read that book. It changed my life. So, you know, when I said earlier, I don't have any expectations, I'm not sure people that are watching understood what I meant. In the book, Gary says a pro golfer that's putting a 4-foot putt or a 40-foot putt is doing the same action, but he tenses up and gets very anxious over the 4-foot putt as opposed to the 40-foot putt. Why? Because the expectations changed. And they really shouldn't. So that's my point, is I don't have expectations on myself or the people that I work with other than to win the day today. So I just wanted to put that in there. Mind Gym, Gary Mack. It'll give you just little mental exercises to do that will train you to be stronger, and it can help in sobriety and also just, you know, warding off mental health. But as far as changing people and the stigma, I don't know that that'll ever happen, because I deal with a lot of public people. That's my specialty. And most of them don't want to go public. They don't want to admit it because of the fear they'll be judged, the fear they'll be fired. And I respect that. I can't tell them otherwise. I only went public because my coach asked me to. He goes, I think you can help a lot of people if you tell them that you turned your life around and this is how you did it. So that was my road, but I don't tell anybody to follow that particular road. So I don't know if we'll ever change it. I really don't. I mean, it doesn't help when the guy that shoots 58 people in the parking lot of Mandalay Bay in Vegas a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the news reports say he was suffering from mental illness. Well, no shit, he was. Like, thanks. A report like that sets our whole movement back 100 years. So that, I don't know that we'll ever change that.
And obviously it's tough to completely eradicate many of these complex issues and things that are more than just individual level. They exist in a collective level with people's opinions and views and people's willingness to talk to others and how they gather support. Because I'm sure you mentioned people screaming at you. You have a family, and if your family wasn't supporting you or wasn't there to at least attempt to understand, I'm sure that it would have been 1,000 times harder.
Oh, I couldn't have got sober without my wife. I tell her that all the time. My brothers, I think, had pretty much given up on me. They really didn't understand. I mean, we talked about the genetic aspect of this. They don't suffer from alcoholism, so they just thought I was weak. And it's a disease, right? Like it's complex. So I think the main thing is I've let myself off the hook, and I deal with a lot of people where I say, it's okay. This is what you're battling. But I also have an issue with people that are just daily opining on Facebook with their problems and Twitter. And I'm like, A, tell a therapist, don't tell Facebook. And B, what are you doing about it? Once I realized that there was an opportunity to turn my life around and have a better life in sobriety, I couldn't get enough. I was reading all the books. I mean, you're reading the books. I couldn't get enough learning about it. I wanted to get better. I still want to get better. I don't want to sit and wallow in a swamp of poor me. And there's a lot of people like that.
It's obviously very hard from being in the perspective of someone that feels feels like a victim, and the way to change that always comes with more than just themselves. Now, while they are the main person that has to initiate that, having support around you, being able to confide in others, being able to reach out to those who you know can help you is also a very important thing, because not everyone does it, and most people just don't do it on their own. You mentioned your brothers and them being, or thinking that you were just the black sheep that drew the shortest stick genetically, but that's not the case. Like, it could have happened to them, or it could have not happened to you, and it could have happened to one of your children or one of their children if they had children. So, I mean, the support of your wife you mentioned it being huge. I can only imagine that that would have been something to bring you guys closer together, to strengthen your bond, because that support immediately is so crucial to success. And I don't think it could be ever understated how understanding someone would have to be in that position, especially considering the public stigma that exists.
Well, as I've said many times, what she wants, she gets, because I owe her for that. But two, just remember this: when we got together, I was the party guy and the social guy, and then I got sober, and I'm not that big on being. I don't want to be the party guy at all, and I don't really want to be that social. So the person that she married is not the person that sobered up, right? So there was a challenge there, but by all means, it wasn't easy. But she left here for a week before Christmas to visit our newborn granddaughter, and I found myself alone for a week. That was weird in this pandemic, right? You can't go out and do anything, and I'm home alone. And all of a sudden, it was a change of perspective to me of all the single guys that I'm dealing with right now. Oh, this is why they're reaching out 20 times a day. They're bored. They're lonely. So now I'm bored and lonely. When she was there, I didn't have that feeling. So a lot of life is perspective too. And I also want to say this, like I was on CJOB a couple of weeks ago talking about, a self-help checklist in the pandemic. Because, we're 10 months in. I don't know where you are, where you find yourself, but I'm constantly asking people to do a self-help checklist of themselves. Are you okay? Where are you mentally? Are you able to pay your bills? If you are struggling, here are some tips to bring you out of it. Stuff like that. Like people weren't prepared for this, Matthias. And I often think 10 years ago, I don't know how I would have handled this. I do not know. I don't know. And as my coach tells me, don't think about it. Just be grateful that you are in the position to help other people dealing with this, because this is some scary stuff we're going through right now. And people just aren't prepared. How could they be? Nobody saw it coming.
It's obviously hard because for people that are in university like myself and they're trying to finish school and the go mantra of life became slow, and everyone just stopped. And I don't think that people realized that this is now a wake-up call in a way to people checking up on their mental health, because when you're going so fast, or sometimes people think that being busy is a good thing all the time, but it's not necessarily the case. Being productively busy is good, but being busy for the sake of being busy, almost in a way, is another form of escapism. The same way that people playing video games 24/7, the same way people, drink alcohol or do drugs or whatever. But obviously people will always slap the label and say, oh, alcohol and drugs, that's bad, But hey, if you're just taking up random jobs, or if you're playing video games, or if you, watch pornography or whatever, then that's more normalized. That's more socially acceptable, but that's not the case. And so now that people can't really make themselves busy with a bunch of random stuff, they're really getting a true look internally and saying, well, how am I doing? What is happening? Am I really enjoying what I'm doing? Because to be honest with you, I was on this fast track pace of trying to finish school and not really knowing what I wanted to do afterwards. But as long as I was busy with something, then that was the most important thing. And then the pandemic hit, and I had a radio show before. I was working at UMFM, and I was like, well, what do I do now? And I didn't really know what to do. And then what ended up happening was I reached out to my younger brother and told him about this idea I'd had. And I'd loved talking to people and asking them questions about, sports and as professional athletes or media figures. And so he said, well, why don't you start a podcast? And I was so scared of failing. And I was so scared of, what would other people think? Or I don't want to give off this bravado, I think I have this bravado of being a tough guy and this image of, me being full of myself. And so it was really hard to even just grapple with what seems like now a slight change. And so when I made that change with the support of people around me who had the experience and were helpful, and then when I started to interview people and reach out to them and ask them questions, first guest I had on was Amanda Ruler, who the only reason why I had her on is because I'd seen that she had been on your show. And I was like, wow, she seems really cool. And I was so nervous and scared because I'm like, well, who the hell am I? And, she seemed so great. And then when I started to just break the stigma within myself of just you like talking to people, go reach out to people that you've never known or never met in real life. You never know what may happen of it. And then as soon as you start to build it more and more and you get that momentum and you realize that change isn't always a bad thing, it's a comforting feeling that of being able to grapple with those worries and those thoughts and those voices inside your head of, oh, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. And especially when you're sitting around bored, that's what made me realize, well, okay, what do I really want to do? And I was always telling myself all these other things, but what I really wanted was sports media. And I'd veered off from it when I decided to play football instead, and then came back to it because what was it I really wanted to do? And I knew that deep down, but I never had the chance to face it because I was too scared to really look myself in the mirror and say, okay, this is actually what I want to do. No BSing, nothing. And I think that can be used as a positive aspect from the pandemic, obviously amidst all the other things that people know are not good. So with being alone for a week, what did that actually feel like? Because you said you knew what guys were kind of going through, reaching out to you 20 times a day.
Well, I first want to say Amanda's a pretty special person, pretty cool. So there's that. The other thing, I was a little annoyed because the one thing I was looking forward to, if my wife was going to be away, I wanted to catch up on some reading because Bob McKenzie sent me his new book. James Duffy sent me his new book. There were some other books that people had sent me to review. And I'm like, I'm going to get caught up and read this whole week because I love reading. And I ended up being out of the house every night, which I don't normally do, at our men's mental health club that we have. And I went out for supper with friends on various nights. You know what I mean? Stuff that I wouldn't normally do because I'm home with her. And so it ended up going, I got busy, which is fine, but I didn't do the things that I planned to do. So there's your answer there. But the other thing, it's funny because Darren DuPont, who obviously, the co-host of my show, we laughed and laughed and laughed today about the genesis of our show, because we get some pretty cool things coming in 2021, growth of the show. And we said, we started this and weren't afraid to fail. Like nobody had any expectations of it anyways. Nobody had ever done a Facebook Live show to this degree before. And if it fails, it fails. Who cares? Like we literally weren't afraid to fail. And as a matter of fact, we failed many times. As Darren says, just nobody knows. We know, but not everybody else does. So I'd love to write a book and say, face your fears, slay your demons. But it wasn't really that. We're going to jump into this and do it because it's really cool. And a turning point for me was when a CBC reporter in Toronto wrote me and said, I'm so jealous, CBC broadcaster. He goes, I'm so jealous of you. I'm like, what? You've got the golden carpet ride working in downtown Toronto on Front Street for CBC, right? The big wage and the big pension, everything that I don't have, hosting this startup and owning it. And he's like, you can say whatever you want. It's what we all want. And the way media has come around in 2020, going into 2021, nobody can say what they want. And I'm not sitting here making racist, sexist comments. You've watched the show. I don't do that.
Of course. But
I tell the truth. And that's very rare. So that's a little bit of the rocket fuel of our show is nobody's out there spewing the truth every day. So that's work too.
Of course. And especially with comparing the two worlds of working on Front Street for CBC with, the government funded media corporation versus going to IKS Media and running a show on Facebook Live out of, Regina, Saskatchewan. I find it actually so interesting that many of the people that have had such amazing success in this industry are actually people from Saskatchewan and people that are raised in small town Saskatchewan. And I don't find it a coincidence either, because I went to Toronto for the first time ever in February of this year, and I loved being there. It was super awesome. And one of the things I found was, you can never, ever it cannot be understated how amazing living in the prairies is. And people and all my friends who are listening who live in Vancouver love making fun of Winnipeg. But Winnipeg is the golden grace next to Regina and Saskatoon. And people say to me, oh man, well, at least you're not there. And I say to them, I'm like, why is that? And I'm like, oh, because that's just way worse. And it's so desolate and blah, blah, blah. I was like, man, Saskatchewan is actually home to, so many successful people as per capita, especially for being so small. The people are so kind and down to earth. They really care about their football team. They really are just good people. Like if you've actually been there, you would know. Like I never knew that Jim Pattison was from small town Saskatchewan. I was actually blown away. I was so rattled. Darren Detition is from small town Saskatchewan. Like I was like, what? Like what is like that's so crazy. And so when you find out that there's a unique humility to these places, it really makes you appreciate what you're able to do, especially with what you guys have going on the show. Like many of my friends are like, oh, did you watch this on Rod Pedersen today? Did you hear what he said? You want the breaking news? Go check out his show. And you'd think that it's just the people that are obsessed with using Facebook, and that's not people my age as much anymore. But the fact that there are still those people that they're looking for their fix. And one of the websites I work for is called Sport Management Hub. And there's some people I've interviewed who I'm like, okay, well, I need to find something specific to ask them, but there's not really that many articles that give information about them. Where am I going to go? Oh, I know. I'm just going to type in their name. And if they show up, Rod Pedersen, boom, I'm going to click on the clip, and you're going to have all the details and all the insider info and all the great stuff that people want to watch. And that's one of the great benefits of what you guys have been doing, is that people are going to tune in because it is different. It is unique. And you don't have to worry about people telling you what to say. And you don't have to worry about, people constraining the content of the show. And it doesn't have to go in one specific direction. It can change. You can do football, and then you can do hockey, and then you can do baseball, or you can do Korean baseball, right? Like you guys did. So there's so much fun that you guys have. And a part of it is from the freedom of, not having to worry about there being a specific plan, and B is because you've already been to hell and back, and you've done so many things, and now the ball's in your court and you have the power. And that's the important part of what you guys do on the show. Is, I was watching a clip when I was a kid of Dragon's Den. I used to love watching Dragon's Den. And there was a clip they had of each of the dragons, their backstory. And there was the one about Kevin O'Leary, and he was talking about his rise to fame and all these sorts of things. And he was talking about, like, I crave like freedom, right? Like power and freedom, like that exists. Like I could walk out right now and do whatever I like, and no one can stop me. And that's real power. That's freedom, right? So then that helps you feel a sense of relief. And now people may look at you from the outside and say, oh, well, you're this or you're that. But, if you're just the regular good guy that has, wants to enjoy reading books and wants to enjoy hanging out, at the Cornwall Center, then you get to do that. And that's part of the beauty of what you guys have in the show and what you've been doing.
I had a guy ask me last night, media guy. He's like, how's the show going? And I said, I pinch myself every day. It's the freedom. It literally is the freedom. Like when you ask me, when are we going to tape this podcast? What I say? Whenever you want, and here we are. And, but the thing about the prairie thing, you're still a city guy, right, Matthias?
Yeah, I'm from Winnipeg. Yes.
Just imagine that I was raised on a farm of 640 people. And in the summertime, if I wanted to go out, so I could leave the farmhouse, and not see a person for 3 days if I wanted to. Like that's how you want to talk desolate and isolated. And maybe that's why I wanted to off myself. I don't know. Just that wasn't for me. That was not for me. But there's something about being raised out there that you have common sense. I don't know what it is. So I just laughed when I went into New York to get my intervention training. It was a 3-day training in Times Square in a conference room in downtown Manhattan. Walked in there in a suit, shiny dress shoes, and I could stick my hand out and converse with any of these recovery mucky mucks from LA, Miami, New York, as this farm kid from Milestone, Saskatchewan. Like, think about that. Whereas they could not come to Milestone, Saskatchewan and walk into the co-op general store. They'd been skidded out the door before they even said a word, right? Like it's something about the way that I was raised to be able to talk to people, read people. It's not all clairvoyance, you know what I mean? So I'm very grateful for where I grew up. I like it here, but I'm not racing to get back onto the farm real fast. Let's put it that way.
Oh no, I mean, like if you were to retire any place, where would you retire? Like if you could have like the classic like Brent Musburger job where you just go and do the voice of a team and just chill out, where would you go?
It would be Florida. And I think about it all the time because I'm 48 now and I'm sitting there going, yeah, how many more years? You know what I mean? Like listen, as you know, a third of our viewers are in America, right? And it's growing all the time. So maybe ideally the plan is to do the show out of the States. And, but if you've ever been to Florida, I mean, it's like, I was just checking the forecast this morning. It was going to be 27 degrees today. It's almost New Year's Day, just to get up and throw on shorts and walk down and get a Starbucks, maybe sit there, maybe walk back. You're right by the ocean. It's hot every day. That's Florida for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been once, as I made sure to keep the Bombers jersey up today for the relevance of the CFL. But when I was recording the other day, I had my Gardner Minshew jersey up as a Jaguars fan. I went down to Florida 2 years ago to watch them blank the Colts 6-0, and it was December 2nd, and it was 27 degrees outside. And I was like, "Is this real? Like, am I here? Is this a real thing?" Like,
it's awesome, isn't it?
It's incredible. And honestly, I know people like Florida gets the bad rap from the crazy people in the news and whatnot, but I really enjoyed being there. I saw a lot of similarities in Jacksonville, like I do here from Winnipeg, a great even variety of folks from all demographics, two rivers that run right through the middle of the city, a not so good football team for many years with a great storied past, and being, being close to a major body of water. So Florida's a pretty awesome place, and you'd love to, go hang out and work for the Panthers and, see all the Saskatchewan banners and paraphernalia hanging around when they hear that, hey, Rod Pedersen's down in Florida. Let's go. And all the, the level of wealthy prairie folk go down to North Dakota for shopping, go to Minnesota for shopping, own a condo in Florida or Arizona and for you to go shopping and hang out. So you'd get your fans down there hanging out, repping the Riders. That's for sure.
Well, I didn't even think about it working for the Panthers. I honestly looked at it from a recovery standpoint, because what do you think the drug problem is in Florida? Let's just put it that way, for one. And then you've got 3 NFL teams, 2 NHL teams, 1 MLB team. Like, you could literally hit every league and not have to leave. Yeah. Pardon me? Well, yeah. So what did I say? 1?
Yeah.
Marlins, Rays. Sorry. Yeah. So enough. Mm-hmm. But I mean, just now where I sit here in the prairies, I can catch teams as they come through in CFL, Western Hockey League, Junior A. It would just be the same thing, but bigger leagues and better weather. That's the way I looked at it. I guess I could be on the air too, but the beautiful thing about addiction and mental health, it's everywhere. So I must also say this about the difference between sports and mental health recovery. The guys from Montreal and New York and Vancouver never looked down on me in that industry. Whereas the media people in those markets look down on me because of where I am. But the recovery, physically, geographically, but the recovery people know that addiction's everywhere. And that's one thing where I really realized these are my people, right? They don't judge. Whereas sports and media is full of it. That's the cornerstone of it. So, I'm not that comfortable. I still don't plan on getting into it full time again, because the recovery just makes you feel good.
Yeah. And that's such an important part of loving what you're doing, is feeling that you can be yourself. Right. And that's part of the reason why you guys, again, you have so much fun on the show, is you can be yourself. Everyone knows, people want to listen to what you have to say because they know that you're being real and you're not being fake. Right. So the same Rod Pedersen that talks, from 10 to 12 Saskatchewan time is the same guy that you'd see for lunch at the mall from 2 to 3. The same person that you'd see, hanging out downtown
at the mall,
Regina,
at Polo Park,
hanging out at Polo Park, going to Earl's Polo Park on St. James in Winnipeg. So that's the important thing that carries over into mental health, especially with it being everywhere. So we're just getting towards the end of our time here. So I wanted to ask one more wrap-up question. And obviously we've talked football, but we really haven't dove too deeply into all things Riders. So obviously the Riders, you were the voice of the Riders for 20 years. You witnessed the 07, and was it were you 13 or was it 89? We're all
13.
So 07 and 13. Okay. So you're 07 and 13 are two of the people would say the great cups the Riders have won. I guess everyone's great because they've won all 4, but so those games would obviously stand out. Like, there's no questions asked, but the two things that I have to ask are, what is the craziest Riders game that you ever had to call that was not in the playoffs, the Grey Cup? And who is your favorite person that you've ever interviewed or interacted with who was a rival, was on a rival of the Riders? So it could be the Bombers or it could be the Stamps.
You threw a curve at me there. Well, the game that wasn't a Grey Cup was the Canada Day comeback, which was voted this year as the greatest game of the decade in the CFL. It was the first game of the 2010 regular season, Alouettes at Riders, first game after the 13th man.
Mm-hmm.
So Riders were down 21 points in the second half, came back and won in overtime. That was the one where SJ Green made that unbelievable catch, like voted the greatest catch, I think, in CFL history, or up there. So that was the game. Big comeback against the Alouettes. And no, it was in no way, shape, or form revenge for the loss in the Grey Cup. No. And I can't believe anybody would even think that it was. But it was a pretty wild game to do. There was one game in BC, last game of the regular season, 2004. The winner would clinch first place, I believe, in home field in the West Final. And the Lions won it. And there was 55,000 people there. And I remember walking into BC Place to do the game, and I'm like, holy smokes, if this is what the NFL is like, sign me up. So it doesn't like really feel like it was that long ago, but it was 16 years ago. So when people say those days will never come back, I'd like to think that's wrong, but who knows? I'm not a Vancouverite. And then the rival, just when you say my favorite person I ever interviewed, the first guy that I thought of was John Candy. Because 91 Argos were at the Riders and I was doing sidelines. I was 18 years old. I was 18 years old, 18 or 19. And I was doing sidelines for Rider games. And John Candy was there as the owner of the Argos. And I interviewed him on the sidelines for the Toronto radio. And it was like, I'm telling you, man, I'm big. Like I'm 6'3.5", 6'4". He's bigger than me and 4 times thicker than me. It was like standing beside a Coke fridge. And nice, like the greatest guy ever. But he was wearing a silk suit, and it was like the biggest, most enormous suit I'd ever seen in my life. But he was just, and just remember, this is 91, so this was right after Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Great Outdoors, Uncle
SCTV.
Buck. He was the biggest, literally and figuratively, biggest star in the world. Standing from me to this tripod away. Like, it was unbelievable. But as far as a rival, I didn't make it a habit of interviewing people I didn't like. But I'll honestly say Wally Buono. Because the Calgary-Sask rivalry was pretty big in the 90s, but the Saskatchewan-BC, so the Calgary-Saskatchewan rivalry was big when Wally was there, but it was like red hot intense in the 2000s. Like we wanted to kill each other. And I hated Wally. He hated me. I had him blocked on Twitter. I think he had me blocked on Twitter. And it was just, I'm just a stupid radio guy. I don't even know how I get into these feuds, but I had to interview the opposition coach for the pregame show. And I'll never forget, like, it was like chewing glass going in to interview Wally one-on-one. And he's an intimidating guy if you've ever been around him. And like, I'm my hands are shaking. And I don't know if it's because I was nervous or angry or what. And he's like, I turn it on and welcome to the pregame show. And Wally's like, Rod, what are you so nervous for? And I'm just like, why did I even do this? Why did I even do this? I think I ended it right there. So probably wasn't a guy that you thought. But I think if you notice over the course, I don't have rivalries other than Bo Levi Mitchell. I don't have one with the players. I think that's on any team. I think that's why they come on our show so readily. I never picked on guys. I always respect guys. And I think that's kind of the hallmark of my career.
And Wally Buono, like that is someone that he hasn't been on your show yet, has he? Or
yeah, well, we did a one-on-one in the Hotel Saskatchewan ballroom. The first month we were on the air. Oh yeah, no, we've had him on a couple times because I remember he came on wearing a mask in the pandemic, and I'm like, Wally, you're not going to wear this the whole time, are you? But then he stripped it off, and it was a big joke. So kind of shows you that Wally isn't what you think that he is.
No, I can only imagine like Wally Buono, like talking to someone like that, or especially, when you're a younger radio guy, you're still very young yourself, but like when you're younger and you're talking to him, like, that there's that, you talk about 2008, playoff game between Saskatchewan and BC, like that rivalry, it was real. And it's really weird that it was real because you'd think like how would BC be a rival with anybody on Labor Day? BC and Montreal are just kind of the two people like, now kiss, like that's what the league does because they don't really have a geographic rival. But with how close the games were between the two teams, it only makes sense that they were so big. And speaking of big, you mentioned John Candy. Like growing up as a kid at my grandparents' house, we'd go there and watch SCTV, and that's show from very long ago for people my age that very, very few people know about. They know about SCTV, like the actual place in Toronto and in Chicago, I think it is, but they don't remember the show that had John Candy and Joe Flaherty and Eugene Levy and all the great Canadian stars. And John, like I had an opportunity through the website I work for to do an interview with Adam Rita, who is an absolute class act. He's outstanding. And I never knew before I was doing research that he was the guy that coached the 91 Argos and won the Coach of the Year. And I was so amazed. I was like, oh my goodness, like this guy was like the coach of the team when the, Gretzky and McNall and Candy. And he talked about, how much of an amazing guy that he was and like what a joy he brought to Canadian football with the Argos winning the Grey Cup. And albeit in Winnipeg, the one year that they didn't make the Grey Cup between 90 and 93 was obviously the year they hosted. But you remember you would know better than I would because I wasn't even alive then. That Grey Cup win, like they did a special afterwards about the John Candy Argos. Like that is the most, I would argue, the most iconic Argo team to ever win the Grey Cup. And the fact that you're able to sit there a meter, or stand there a meter within John Candy and get to talk to him in person, just that is something that, that you will always be able to rival other people with forever because, you would only imagine how amazing would have been to have had the opportunity had he, still been alive to this day to be able to interview someone like him because he was at the top of the world, especially with all the John Hughes films that he was in at the time. It's just absolutely insane.
I know. And the thing that bothers me is there's no photo of it because it was 1991. These days, I swear to God, I'd have been snapping selfies like crazy. I wouldn't have even probably got the interview in because I was too ensconced in getting the right photo and getting the right lighting of me and John Candy. But I will tell you this, the CFL needs more coverage and podcasters and broadcasters like you, Matthias. I mean, when I said I was 18 or 19 doing the sidelines there, that's not a joke. That's how young I was. Like I started my career in high school as a DJ, was hired to do the sidelines for the Riders. And I want to say I was 18 or 19, but I did at least play enough hockey to have been able to be an analyst of hockey. I never played football. But for you've played enough football at a high level that that's only going to serve you well. I mean, you're getting into it at the right time. Let's put it this way. And my point on that is you'll be able to, and already are able to analyze the game like not too many can in this country. So I applaud you for the decisions that you've made. And it looks like you found your niche. And you know what I'm saying? Like, know way more about the game than most analysts that are yapping on the air now all across this country. And as a matter of fact, Gus Farrat, who's become an NFL regular on our show, said that follow Gus Farrat on Twitter because he sits and calls out all the Pittsburgh talk hosts for dumb things that they say. And I'm like, thank God there was nobody doing that when I was voice of the Riders. As a guy that never played football. Like, I'm pretty confident in hockey. I've coached it, reffed it, played it. Then now you're not getting much by me in hockey. Football, different story. So, you're in a good spot. We're good, I just got low battery message.
Oh yeah, no worries. We're almost towards the end of our time, but yeah, that's like that. It's I don't know. I mean, I love just studying the history of the game and obviously, having been born in '96, like being at the Grey Cup this year was the first time I ever saw the Bombers win in my life. So it really made me appreciate figuring out, or I gained appreciation from figuring out, okay, where did this team come from? Because I didn't know about all the Grey Cup losses that they had. I knew about 2007 because I actually didn't even watch that game. I was just a kid. I was only like 11 years old. And I knew about 2011 because I watched it and that was it. I didn't know about 01 and what that meant. I didn't know about 93, 92, and the other, like the 5 Grey Cup losses they had. So at the start of the pandemic, what I did was I did research on the history of the Bombers, before them winning the Grey Cup. And I started creating just these fun videos, just slapping it together easily through iMovie and like looking back at, okay, what were the 5 Bomber teams that, should have won the Grey Cup that didn't? And obviously with there being a bit of recency bias towards the teams in 2016 and 18, but looking at that 2002 team and going, wow, Milton, Kahari Jones that year were unstoppable. The connection they had was unlike anything that pro football had seen at that time. Right. And having had the amazing opportunity to have interviewed Milt on my show, talking about that with him, one of the things he said to me was, I know that I can tell you've done your research because you weren't alive or you were a toddler during this time. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, I remember the first time I ever got real exposure to like being super dialed into the history of football was in the summer of grade 11. I was trying to play football so I could actually make my high school team. And I remember my brother and I religiously watching every NFL top 10 that they had ever produced on NFL Network. We were just sitting down and just skipping through them and watching and listening and learning. And I guess that's how I've tried to patch together different pieces of history to make sense as to, okay, what is the context of this game, or why was this Grey Cup win so iconic, or what was iconic about, the 2013 Grey Cup win for the Riders. I just knew there was no way that they were going to lose and that Hamilton wasn't going to live that building alive. But why was it so iconic? What was crazy about 2007 or 1989? Like Saskatchewan was a 9-9 team, then ended up beating, the heavily favored Tiger Cats, but then Tony Champion's touchdown on, third and short towards the end of the game. Like how did that parlay into the next time that they won? So all the different connections that you can make from old CFL games only helps your understanding with the game going forward, but it's very easy when you've lived through it like yourself.
Absolutely.
Well, Rod, that's the end of our time today. I honestly can't express from the bottom of my heart how grateful I am and super happy that you're able to be on today's episode to help forward the conversation about mental health and to help at least chip away at the stigma in some sense, or at least let this be a conversation opener for another person down the road, and who knows who it may be. But the talk about football and about mental health is so enjoyable. It's very important. And what you guys are doing at the Rod Pedersen Show, keep doing it, because people like myself, people my age, are tuning in and watching. So it's not just the old people on Facebook. Trust me. We love watching what you guys have to say.
I really appreciate it, man. And I hope you'll return the favor. And when we're playing football in 2021, come on and return the favor on my show.
Absolutely. Will do. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to today's episode with the host of the Rod Pedersen Show, Rod Pedersen.